important reputationally, but it's also important from a quality perspective. And I think it's really important that whilst we're trying to advocate for change, we look at it through a number of different lenses, because that will attract the attention of a number of different people to add their voice to what it is that we're doing. Many retailers will launch their own initiatives around different aspects of aquaculture, including animal welfare, but that can produce a lot of extra work and confusion for producers. So the more that we can harmonise those aspects, either through private standards and or regulation, the better for producers. I loved the figure that 79% of consumers allegedly want welfare information on food labels. I haven't got time to debate that specifically, but what it does do is remind me to tell you that, because that's why the private sector, like voluntary standards, gives them an opportunity to demonstrate that they are working to best practice, they're sourcing through best practice. And we're also represented here by Global Gap, another of the leading standards around the business of seafood and agriculture. And that's why our standards are popular, because they ensure that buyers can buy to very high qualities where regulations are perhaps not in place. But it also means that we can help inform decisions and discussions like this from the private sector. So one of the things that Global Aquaculture does, Global Aquaculture Alliance, is own and run and govern, which is very important, the governance of the best aquaculture practice standards. And they're used by the marketplace all over the world to demonstrate best practice. Some 2 million tonnes of farm fish through hatchery, farming, processing and feed are all covered under best aquaculture practice standards on a voluntary basis. They currently cover environmental, food safety and social issues, and now are bringing in the aspect of fish welfare, which arguably was in there but not really highlighted before and not investigated. And so these voluntary standards have an important part to play in helping to kind of lead and harmonise this practice. If we look at the fact that the EU is also the world's biggest importer of seafood, it's the world's biggest market for seafood, it's also important that the Global Aquaculture Alliance, for example, is an American organisation. So by working with these global entities, what we're doing is harmonising our requirements for the imported seafood as well. And also ensuring to colleagues such as gentlemen from FAEAP that our producers within the EU are working on a level playing field. Everyone's working to the same kind of standards. So to that end, Global Aquaculture Alliance, together with some other organisations, are currently undergoing a 3-year project to evaluate currently what's going on, what's needed, and to recommend fish welfare best practices in aquaculture, and then to recommend suggested changes as may be appropriate to fish welfare standards. And at the moment that's a focus on internationally traded species of catfish, tilapia and salmon, but I think many of those lessons will be able to be extended. Typically we work with industry experts and academics, evaluating what we know and doing research into some specific projects. For example, 2 colleagues from Stirling University are here. They just raised their hands, and we'll come to their project in a moment that they're contributing to this. So I'll just talk very briefly about the different stages of the project. I've got my stopwatch going here, so that's why I'm talking so fast.
Thank you.
GAA's project, basically, part 1, evaluation of current fish welfare practices. 3-step approach, literature overview, evaluating the best practices of those species that I just mentioned, and looking to create specific projects where we need to gain extra knowledge to evaluate sort of welfare indicators. GAA works with industry leaders and kind of early adopters around these things, and they'll go and test the feasibility and scalability of different indicators to determine if they're commercially scalable, because clearly that's important in the domain of which we're talking about. And whilst these results are going to be specific to the species tested, we will be looking to try and also identify things that can go and move on to other species as well. I mentioned at the beginning that one of our programs is the GAA Academy, and that's where we create multilingual, online, very, very high quality academic training tools. So I heard someone talking about the business of research and how often that's very difficult to maintain that and embed it into practice. So hopefully by working with organisations like this who have these sort of tools to communicate, we can get that out there. We also run an annual conference that moves around the world. So these are some of the reasons why we're working on this project, that the outcomes of which we're going to be able to disseminate through groups like this and also into a global context. And then finally, we will of course incorporate the elements that it's not about us deciding, it's about the experts with whom we work deciding that there are core elements that need to be included in best aquaculture practice standards, so that ultimately they're delivering not only across hatcheries, farms, feeds, processing and so forth, they're delivering on environment, they're delivering on human social issues, but they're also delivering on fish welfare and food safety. And that will go through our governance process to make sure that we can make that happen. So rather than go through, so I did want to mention the Stirling University project as well, because they're here if you want to talk to them over lunch. They're working on some specific aspects of salmon welfare practice and a comparison of fish welfare standards at the moment in order to inform this project. So to recap, 3-year project being worked through ourselves, looking to embed and educate and communicate around what is globally going to be consensus on the business of best practice for fish welfare in the initial basis on salmon, tilapia, and I've even forgotten what the other one was, catfish, thank you. I was just seeing if you were listening, but hopefully we can extend that out further. Really look forward to talking to you and working with you more. 7:24, not too bad, okay?
Very good, thank you very much. Thank you to all our speakers, and thank you to everyone for waiting patiently through all the presentations. So a lot of topics have been covered. So let's have a fruitful and diverse a discussion as possible. As moderator, obviously, I'm going to ask you to keep your questions short and say who you are and where you're from when you're introducing yourselves. But as you can see from the setup of the room, the goal is to hear all voices, all stakeholders today. And I think we might want to start by directing questions at the speakers, but the aim is to direct questions at anyone. So perhaps, I don't know if the organiser wants to open the discussion. Don?
No, I'd much rather hear from somebody else, please.
If not often, I'm lost for words.
I have a question then.
Good.
Yes, well, I always like to kick things off, and I try to stay quiet, but it's not a strong point of mine. I was really interested, I'm sure others were, on the survey that you've done with consumers, and I think what we know from the business of standards is that often, and particularly when prompted, consumers, and we're all consumers, I just want to remind us of that, we say things that we think we believe, but we're not necessarily prepared to act on them. And for example, the business of labelling around welfare, we don't see that very much happening on other foodstuffs as well. So whilst I'm not belittling the survey at all, and I think it's enormously helpful, I just think that we need to remember that that's a kind of high-level piece, and how much we need to dig into not only what sits behind that, how prompted it was and so forth, people's understanding of all of that, but how much, and this is my question, how much they're willing to act upon it. And I wonder if you have dug into that at all, and acting upon that might be paying more, for example.
Well, at the comment, we went on to ask how consumers want to receive that information, and they divided evenly between standalone welfare information or incorporated within other labels, whether that's sustainable or organic. We did ask a willingness to pay question as well, but there would be even more to say about that than a labelling information question. So we take it as a clear sign that the consumer wants the guarantees, but how that can be communicated to them is to be confirmed.
And often what we know, not just in the business of seafood, but of research in the business of retail generally, is that there is an expectation that whoever's selling that product has made those assurances. And so certainly I think we as a standard organisation, and I'm even going to suggest that Global Gap too, but you know, we would like to work further with you on really understanding what standards mean, what expectations are, and how to simplify that as well.
Yeah,
And if I can add to what Doug said, of course, I think it's a fair question, and we do realize that what citizens say in a survey will be different than when they are shopping. But that's also why we have to work together to raise awareness and make sure that the lower quality products, that in the end they will disappear from the shelves, and that Europe will distinguish itself on quality, because we believe that's not only important for animals, but it's also important for the sector, because we will never be able to win the race to the bottom happening elsewhere.
I think we have a question over there.
Hello, my name is Jan Kappel. I'm the Secretary General of the European Anglers Alliance. I have a question to the Commission about sentient and sentience. Do you have a firm definition of that? People talk a lot about sentient, but they have different ideas about what it actually means. The questionnaire we heard about earlier, I don't think you used the term sentient as a question to people. You interpreted what the... Did you ask directly what sentient is? And that's very interesting, because I would say more than 90% of people don't know what it is, and the rest will differ in opinions about what it is. About welfare, the Commission, again, how do the Commission see welfare and sustainability, the relation between it? Because some of the people in this room want animal welfare to be part of the sustainable development definitions, which I think is totally wrong. It has nothing to do with sustainability. What is the Commission's opinion about that? Thank you.
Who wants to take that from the Commission? What?
I confess that I might have to look at some of the EFSA opinions, the opinions from the European Food Safety Authority, to see if the definition, I have to come back to you on that. But on the sustainable production, my colleague from DG Mara, I'm sure, would have something to add in terms of what the Commission is doing in this area, and in particular what DG Mara, the Director General for Maritime Affairs, has done.
Yeah, just on what sustainability criteria are taken into account. Usually when we're talking about sustainability at a global level, it's the commonly accepted definition is environmental, social, and economic, those three. Of course, by ensuring these things, you have an impact on animal health. So in that sense, on animal welfare. So in that sense, it's linked, but it's not part of the core definition of sustainability.
Okay, thank you. I have a question over there.
Yeah, hi, I'm Veikka Lahtinen from
Do you want your microphone?
Yes, hello, I'm Veikka Lahtinen from Finland, from an animal advocacy organization called Animalia, and I have a question for the representatives of Eurogroup, so either Mr. Whaley or Ms. Hamlers, because we've heard several comments about how EU-level regulation of aquaculture would not be necessarily needed. I'm just wondering, as representatives of animal advocacy organizations within the EU, how do you see the role of EU-level regulation of aquaculture? Could this maybe be a possibility to make welfare a EU-wide thing, and also at the same time prevent EU countries from competing with each other with lower prices and thus lower welfare within aquaculture?
I will start. I think this is a very good question. I think there is a strong case for the EU regulators to harmonize, to incorporate science and evidence. And yes, ideally we would like to see species-specific legislation for fish. But that won't happen in the near future. We also have to be realistic, but it's definitely one of our goals. But then a lot can be done within the existing regulatory framework with regard to the transport of fish, and the killing of fish. And we also believe it will be very important to issue guidance on the keeping of fish, interpreting existing legislation like the General Farming Directive. We are talking to the Commission, as what already said, but also to a lot of other stakeholders, the member states in particular, to see how we can drive this process and how we can see what's feasible, what's realistic, to ensure a stronger level playing field and better protect fish at the same time.
Okay, yeah, Lily?
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Leni Engels. I'm a vet attaché here at the German Perm Rep in Brussels. I don't have a question, just a statement. In Germany, we have, in addition to the EU existing legislation, for example, the regulation 1099, domestic legislation to safeguard the welfare of fish and invertebrates during transport and slaughter. For example, it is mandatory to stun fish prior to killing, and stunning or killing through ice is not permitted in Germany. There are some exceptions, of course. For example, mass catching from a fishing vessel is accepted from this. And with a view to achieving a level playing field across Europe, we would support an increased level of cooperation on fish welfare.
Does anyone want to react to that statement? No? If not, I have a question here.
Okay. Christophe Moyes from Professional Farming. So